Well, hello, good evening, and happy New Year's Eve. Thank you for coming in. This is Talking Pop Culture with Jake D, and we are discussing episode 3 of The Stand, Blank Page. All right, just got rocking and rolling. Looks like we have got just another red shirt here this evening. It is good to see you, my brother. Very good to see you. So, all right, when we last left, the folks that we saw in Boulder mainly, we did get a brief glimpse of Nick and a few of the others there in Boulder. And episode 3 picks up once again deep in the past. And we get a shot of Nadine as a child when she first got her first messages from Randall Flagg. And I got to be honest with you, this episode was an absolute royal mess in my mind. It was skipping all over the place. I took a count of just how many times this episode skipped back and forth in time. I'm going to tally it up here real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we jumped back and forth in time in episode 3, roughly 11 or 12 different times, jumping all around and what was going on. And it just creates an absolute narrative mess of this show. Now, I did get one pleasant surprise in this episode, and I did not think that the character of Glenn and the dog Kojak were even going to be included in the series. And the reason I didn't is because I couldn't find anybody listed as playing Glenn in the official cast listing. So I was pleasantly surprised that Glenn did show up today, because he's a very cool character. He's an old professor sociologist who helps ground Stu in the new world, and is actually kind of a big deal for how they develop the society in Boulder, and even ultimately kind of rigs the election, so to speak, where they first elect the committee that's in charge of Boulder. So when I had first thought that he wasn't even going to be part of the series, I was kind of pissed off, because that wasn't good. Right? He's a very integral, important character, but I thought they'd cut him out. So seeing him pop in was good. The jumping around in time gets much, much worse in this episode. I counted, 12 times jumping back and forth between the sort of hit of Captain Trips, and then they had a few scenes that were during the trips from various places to Boulder, and then, of course, cuts to Boulder as well. In terms of new characters introduced in this particular episode, Jason C., welcome to the stream. Glad to see you, my friend. So other new characters introduced in today's episode, other than Glenn, we did also get to see Nick Andros in Shoyo, Arkansas, which was good. Having Nick there and getting a little bit more of his backstory, of course, was absolutely necessary. And we did finally get an extended scene with Whoopi as Mother Abigail in a couple, 3 instances. Actually, a dream sequence with Nick, as well as with the crew in Boulder, the committee that's sort of overseeing the running of Boulder, of which she's sort of the spiritual matriarch. So in a sense, she was kind of a new character introduced, because you actually saw her doing something other than just making a brief appearance. And we did also get introduced to one of the more interesting characters of the novel, in Tom Cullen, Moon, that spells Tom. And I do want to give credit to the actor who played Tom, for the most part, he rolled with it pretty well. I didn't like how he used Tom has a thing that he says in the novel. He just says, "My laws." He says that all the time. And it's sort of his stall phrase that he busts out, or just sort of a general exclamation. And that I have to admit didn't really come off very well. I didn't like how the actor used it, but the rest of the performance as, the mentally challenged guy was pretty solid. But the way that he included Tom's kind of catchphrase, for lack of a better word, just didn't feel well done to me. It wasn't very natural or internalized by the actor. So that could be a problem as we move forward in this series. Your general plot track that we got tonight, starts out with Nadine way in the past as a kid when she gets her first message from Flag, says Nadine's going to be my queen and all this. And then we immediately cut to Larry and Stu walking a road in Boulder after an unsuccessful deer hunt, and a guy rolls in a hot yellow car. And he falls out of it, just exhausted and injured. And Stu and Larry run up to the guy. They figure out that he's from Vegas, and they see that he had been crucified, which, of course, if you read the book, you understand that there were indeed crucifixions going on in Vegas by anybody who pushed back against Flag and the way that he is and who he was. So this dude rolls in, and Stu and Larry collect him. And then we pop into Boulder to Nadine, who's getting ready for school. You see that for just a couple of minutes, and then bam, flashback. They're on the road, and she's meeting up with Larry for the first time, her and Joe. Of course, Joe attacked Larry and tried to kill him with the knife. Larry, being a big, strong man, had no issues with it. And then, bam, we're back into Boulder. Nadine's taking Joe to school. Bam, we're back into the flashback of Nadine and Joe meeting Larry, and the two of them, coming to an agreement to travel together, and Larry talking about how he's following Harold and Franny across the country. And then, bam, we're back in Boulder again. And Nadine and Joe leave because they found a stain from somebody who died in the school that she was checking out. We go over to Fran, who's getting a sonogram, and that ends the portion in Boulder, which is pretty brief. And they kind of mentioned that a veterinary tech's going to help with the delivery, and that's going to work out because he's delivered a lot of, despite the fact that they were mammalian, he's attended to quite a few books or deliveries, excuse me. And then after the sonogram, bam, we've got another flashback. Harold and Franny meeting up with Stu for the first time. Harold's, of course, acting very shifty because he is shifty, and obviously he's worried about Stu stepping in on Franny, whom he sees as his girl, which we, of course, know does indeed happen because Stu and Franny are a couple in Boulder. And then, bam, we're back to Boulder again. They bring the Vegas guy into the clinic and to get him some medical care. And then, bam, yet another flashback. We meet Nick in Shoyo when he gets the shit kicked out of him in the bar because in the show they had him accidentally bump into a guy and spill his beer, and he gets the living hell beat out of him. And then, bam, we get another shift. Nick having a dream with Flag. Bam, another shift. Nick wakes up in the hospital. The only guy left alive in the hospital is the dude who beat the living crap out of Nick and took his eye out, which is a change from the book story. In the book story, he was attacked later and had the eye nearly taken out. Something that I can see you'd want to adjust for artistic purposes. I mean, I can get that, right? And then, bam, we shift again. Stu meeting up with Glenn on his trip across the country, which is, of course, after he met up with Fran and Harold. I don't think those two meetings were quite so close together in the book, but I guess I can, again, some of the artistic changes you need to make in a show versus the book, I can forgive compressing that timeline. They have a little conversation about how the flu affected all of man's best friends. So almost all the dogs got killed by Captain Trips. Almost all the horses got killed by Captain Trips. It's guinea pigs, etc., etc. Any animal that lived closely with humans has also been killed by and large. But the deer are everywhere. And the meeting with Glenn and Stu was actually pretty good. I did enjoy that scene, but it was among the first scenes in the entire episode. And we're like over halfway through it. It was like the first scene that I actually enjoyed for the entire episode. And then, bam, we shift again. And Nick is having a dream sequence where he meets up and actually talks with Mother Abigail. And she tells him to come see her, and she wants him to be her voice. And then, bam, we shift again. Nick's back in the hospital, and we get the introduction of Tom Cullen. Bam, shift again. Larry and Nadine are in a ballpark, and Larry's playing the guitar, and she notices that Joe is responding to the guitar, and he gives Joe the guitar, which in the book was a really amazing scene where Joe and Larry were able to bond. They tried to replicate that here, but it just didn't work as well. Jason, I know exactly which viral video you're talking about, and I can't decide if I'm honored or embarrassed to be included in the same sentence there. Yeah, the little one likes to get in the background if I let her, because she knew she needed to be quiet while we had a quick stream here. So don't worry, I will go out and spend most of New Year's Eve with them, but wanted to get through really quickly talking about The Stand for the evening. But so we have the guitar scene, and then bam, we've got another shift with Stu going through Glenn's paintings, and he sees Abigail and Franny in the paintings, and they figure out that they've been having this experience together. Really, something that I didn't like here is Glenn was a hack of a painter, and it was kind of a funny humanizing point in the book where he talked about how he was probably the best painter left on earth, even though he sucked. And the pictures that were all over Glenn's house, all these paintings, were actually totally decent. Not going to be masterpieces in the Louvre, but they're also pretty good. Certainly a hell of a lot better than I can do. Glenn's non-talent at painting was not important, but an element of the story, because he was sort of just trying to do some things that he'd always wanted to do in order to create a sense of normalcy for him in the post Captain Trips world. So I don't know. I didn't like that particular change, that they made his painting actually be pretty decent. And not only that, but he never painted Mother Abigail or Franny or anything like that. Maybe Mother Abigail, but he didn't paint Franny. I'm sure of that. And then, bam, we shift back to Boulder. They're in the clinic, and they're having a discussion among the committee about how to sort of legitimize themselves as the leaders of the Boulder Free Zone. And Glenn's talking about having an election. And then Mother Abigail rolls up, and she's pissed off at the committee that they're not just talking to Nick in order to get and relay messages to and from her. They go into the room where the Vegas guy is. He's got the message to deliver from Flag, and Flag basically kills him right in front of Mother Abigail and the rest of the committee. And it's intended to be a scene to sort of exude the power of Flag, I think, right? And he's giving a message basically that, he's coming and they better watch out. And the scene just, I don't know, it didn't affect me the way that I think it was intended to. And it was, I don't know, it just seemed like it fell flat to me. It didn't have the power it seemed like it was supposed to. I'm not sure how to describe it better than that. We were supposed to get fearful of Flag based on him killing this messenger that he sent, and I just wasn't. I don't know if those of you in the chat, if you've watched it, let me know if you felt the same way. But it didn't carry any kind of power. Maybe it was because I knew that's what it was supposed to do, but it didn't give me what it should have about the fear of the evil of Flag and his power, and that they needed to do something about the guy. It just fell flat. I don't know what to say other than that, man. And the final couple scenes of the episode, we get back to Nadine, and she's having a dream of Flag where he's talking to her about her needing to come to him, and she knows that she is his queen, and she wants to get out of Boulder. And he tells her that, of course, she can do that, but first she needs to set off a powder keg by the name of Harold Lauder. And she pulled out the same, King called it a planchette in the novel, but it's kind of like a Ouija board, except it's got a pen inserted into it that it uses to write something, and it wrote Harold's name out, who of course is the powder keg that's going to attempt to blow up a lot of people here once we wrap up kind of the middle part of the book that we're getting bits and pieces of scattered throughout. And the closing scene is the body crew dumping the body of the Vegas guy in a brand new mass grave. So that's the events of the episode. It's so haphazard with the way that it skips around back and forth between Boulder and the past, sometimes the far past, sometimes the mid past, sometimes their childhoods, depending on what part of the story they're trying to bring in. It gets so damn erratic that if I didn't know the story very well from reading the novel, I feel like I'd be lost as hell and not know what's going on. I've definitely got the advantage of knowing the novel really, really well. And so that helps me out in tracking what the hell's going on. But skipping everything around like this, you completely lose any sort of emotional investment into these characters. If I didn't know who these people were, I wouldn't give a shit about them. And I don't think that the typical viewer does in this telling of the story. And the jumping around from time to time and place to place so erratically in this show that it completely prevents you from experiencing the journey and arcs that each of these characters had. And yes, exactly. So yeah, the nonlinear storytelling confused Mrs. Redshirt, who hasn't read the book. And one of the first things I did in the stream was count how many times they jumped around, right? And yeah, it was so excessive in this episode. I mean, it was almost like Memento how much they were jumping back and forth, and it is not effective. I don't think I think after this episode, most casual viewers are just going to tune out completely from this show, and I can't blame them. I'm clocking in at like a 4 out of 10 on this one. It was not a good episode. I knew what was going on, and I had trouble following it. Just Another Red Shirt's Mrs. Red Shirt, she was having trouble following it, which is what I was afraid of from the very first episode when I saw them doing this time jumping. So she's not familiar with the story and she's having trouble tracking. And having that go on, I think we're about to see just sort of a massive drop off in interest on this show, quite honestly, because this was just a total shit episode. It really, really was. I was not able to develop the type of connection to Nick that I should have. I enjoyed the appearance of Tom. I enjoyed the appearance of Glenn. You're starting to connect with Stu a little bit more, but you should have already been deeply connected with Stu. You should have, he really should have been your guy already. Now, and the missing big things, like Nick's story got compressed like crazy, and they took a lot of details out of it, like when he became the deputy of Shoyo and how he was actually monitoring these prisoners in the jail as Captain Trips went through, and he was having to go to the diner to get them their food and grill them up the hamburgers himself as everybody started getting sick and dying. And missing out on that entire experience makes Nick so much less sympathetic and relatable. As it is, he's just this guy who got the shit beat out of him, who happens to be a deaf mute, and you don't care. By dropping the significance of his story during Captain Trips and, you know, taking it from a broad arc into just this quick cut, it just completely kills any sympathy that you'd really want to develop for this guy, because he's had a pretty shit life, man. I mean, overall, but the viewers don't know that. And there's no way to connect to Nick like you had in the novel. And they fucked up Larry's backstory last week. They turned him into just a piece of shit instead of a guy who just couldn't find his groove and was not I'm not even sure what the right word for him exactly was. I mean, in the novel, his mother said there was something in him that was like biting on metal or biting on iron, something like that. And then, yeah, Jason C says he's more confused than Mrs. Redshirt because he hasn't read the book or watched the TV show. Yeah, I believe it, man. And that was my number one concern. Yeah, they turned Nick into an extra. Exactly. And Nick is so goddamn important. But you, other than Mother Abigail has decided that he's going to be her mouthpiece, like, what the fuck do we know about Nick? Hardly anything if the only thing you've done is watch this show. And I don't see how a casual viewer gives a fuck about this character. He's nobody, but he's so important that Mother Abigail, whom you also don't really care about yet. You don't know anything about her. So why does anybody care about Mother Abigail either? You know, we've seen her in a couple of dreams and we saw her in live once so far. And nobody who's a casual viewer understands her significance at this stage. And you don't even have a really strong understanding of Flag's significance either. And yeah, it's a big book and it's dense. I mean, I read it for the first time when I was probably, I want to say 13 or 14, something like that. It's definitely worth the read, Jason C. And it's a hell of a lot more rewarding than this series. All the same characters are there, but the depth and the reason why you really develop kind of a love for these people, it's just not present in this show. And I'm afraid it's just going to keep careening downhill. We're setting up a bunch of pieces, but nobody gives a fuck about why the pieces are where they are, especially people who haven't read the book. And this is just, I mean, this is just a disaster of a series, quite honestly. And yeah, James, Nick's probably the most important character on the Boulder side. I completely agree with you. And yes, oh, please, God, flesh him out more. The trouble is, a lot of the fleshing out of who he is just got skipped. The whole experience that he had in Shoyo was several weeks long that included time prior to Captain Trips, and you learn so much about Nick during that experience that he has with the sheriff when he's recovering medically in the jail, and he develops a really close relationship with the sheriff and his wife. Is so important to who Nick is. And yes, he is just ungodly important. And they're building up to a pretty big event for Nick related to Harold. And if they stay true to the book, I mean, my take is that somebody like Jason isn't going to understand why it even matters. I mean, James and Just Another Red Shirt, I mean, you two know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to stay away from future episode spoilers for people who, either haven't read the book and are just experiencing the series for the first time. There's a big event that's going to happen with Nick, and I don't think that that the viewers like Jason C are going to be affected by it. And I mean, it is good that we have Tom and Nick getting introduced to each other, but I've got this funny feeling that we're going to see very little of Tom and Nick on their journey. And so later in the book, or later in the series, when Tom and Nick take another journey at the end, no one's going to give a fuck. You know what I mean? I don't see how anybody is going to care because they are screwing this up so badly. I'm so disappointed to give this a 4 out of 10 because I love this book and it could have been something great, but they're just destroying it and ripping it apart. Gosh, I mean, what can I say good about the episode? I did like Glenn. I like the actor. I like the characterization overall. That was pretty solid. Geek Tropology, how are you? I gotta be honest with you, Geek Tropology. We have got a CBS tragedy going on here with The Stand. It's absolutely awful, Pablo. And I don't at this point see how the series can recover. It's going to be, unfortunately, I wish I could say it was going to be forgettable. I think it's going to be memorable for being so bad, which sucks because this is an amazing story. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap her up for tonight. So The Stand, episode 3, Blank Page. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. And thank you for stopping by the channel to watch my review of The Stand. Also cover lots of other pop culture items. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Please remember to hit that like button and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time stopping by the channel and you've watched this long, by golly, I hope I've earned your subscription. Have a good evening.